Ndidi sat beneath the old Udala tree as the sun dipped low, its golden fingers brushing against her skin like a farewell from the ancestors. Her eyes, deep and quiet like rain-soaked earth, were fixed on the beads she rolled between her fingers, black onyx beads that once adorned her mother's sacred gourd. Her braids, long and thick, tumbled around her shoulders like rivers of woven night. They whispered when the wind came. They pulsed when she dreamed. The village women said her hair carried more than beauty, it carried memory. Power. Her mother, Mama Ifeoma, had been a revered herbalist, known far beyond the hills and rivers of Omuo. She cured with roots and dreams, and her hair was the living thread of her gift. Ndidi's mother had died with her hands on her daughter's head, wrapping the final braid with murmured prayers in a language older than drums. That night, the fireflies didn't dance. The river slowed. And the village knew something holy had passed on. From that day, the elders stopped Ndidi on the paths and bowed slightly. Children, even the mischievous ones, grew silent when she passed. But with her mother gone, the house grew cold in spirit. Her father, once a strong man with a proud gait and laugh that shook the leaves, shrank into himself. Grief hollowed his chest like a calabash scraped raw. And when the widow came with her honeyed voice and cooking pot full of flattery, he didn't resist. The widow, Madame Ezeki, arrived with her son Obinna, a boy carved from obsidian, tall, strong, and beautiful in the way a cobra is before it strikes. He smiled with his mouth, but never with his eyes. On the day they moved in, Ndidi's braids twitched like leaves warning of a storm. She stood beside her father, silent, her fingers digging into her wrapper, while Obinna smirked at her like a hunter spotting a deer that didn't know it had been caught. At first, things remained quiet. Ndidi went about her days helping villagers with poultices and leaf teas, the knowledge passed down through her blood. Her braids would sometimes hum when she touched someone's skin, guiding her fingers to the right herb. In her dreams, her mother often visited, standing by the river, hair moving like smoke, eyes sad but proud. But soon, the peace began to wither like yam leaves in dry season. Obinna resented the reverence she received. He couldn't understand why people came to her instead of him, why elders respected her more than they ever did his mother. He would sit by the window watching as children gathered around her, listening to tales of tree spirits and skywalkers. When she walked past, he would mimic her under his breath, calling her snakehead or witch girl just low enough so only she could hear. But Ndidi said nothing. Her silence was a fortress, and her braids were her guards. There was power in those braids. The villagers said they moved when no wind blew. That once, during a fevered sleep, they coiled around a venomous snake slithering too close to her. That they whispered stories of places she had never been. Mothers told their daughters, if Ndidi invites you to touch her hair, do so with respect. If not, never raise your hand. Even goats stepped aside when she walked past. Obinna's jealousy festered. He told his mother that the girl was dangerous, that her hair was cursed, that it would someday kill them all. Madame Ezeki, bitter and sharp-tongued, encouraged the thought. You are a man, she told him one night by firelight, while she is only a girl with dead weeds on her head. If the village cannot see your worth, then show them. That was the first time Obinna's eyes truly burned, not with anger, but with hunger. The kind that didn't go away until it swallowed something precious. One evening, as the horizon bled red with dusk, Ndidi lay in her mat, her window open to the cooling wind. Her braids spilled around her like a woven net, moving slightly even though the room was still. Sleep crept into her bones, and the familiar tug of dream took her by the hand. In the dream, she stood in a dark clearing. The moon above was no longer silver, it dripped crimson, casting blood-colored shadows on the trees. Her braids twitched, lifting like antennae, alert. Then she saw him, Obinna, standing across from her with a knife in one hand and a torch in the other. Behind him, her mother wept silently, her image flickering like a dying flame. From the crimson moon, a voice echoed, thin as smoke, cold as stone, he will betray you when the moon bleeds. Ndidi woke with a start. Her scalp tingled, the braids twitching on their own. The room was quiet, yet the air felt wrong. She touched her head gently, whispering a prayer her mother taught her. The braids calmed but did not rest. Something had shifted. The balance was trembling. From the shadows of the next room, Obinna watched. His lips curled into a small, triumphant smile. He had already decided what to do. And the moon was already beginning to bleed. Obinna could no longer bear it. Every time he walked through the village, it was Ndidi's name on the lips of elders, her wisdom sought in hushed tones. Even the children sang her praises in their silly songs. No one seemed to notice him, tall, strong, handsome Obinna. No one admired his carvings, his hunting skills, or the way he never missed a target with his sling. It was always her, Ndidi with her mysterious eyes and living braids, Ndidi who carried the gift of her mother's spirit like a crown. Each day, Obinna watched her from behind trees, corners, and doorways, and what began as envy twisted into something darker. It wasn't just jealousy anymore, it was hatred, hot and pulsing like a fever. Hatred that clawed at the inside of his chest every time someone touched their forehead in respect as she passed. His mother, Madame Ezeki, fanned the flames each night by the hearth. "She will take everything from you," she whispered, her eyes glinting like wet stones. "Your future, your inheritance, your father's attention. You're a man, Obinna, and you are being overshadowed by a girl and her cursed hair. Do you want the village to kneel at her feet while you stand in her shadow? She is a witch child. Mark my words. She has bewitched them all." Obinna clenched his fists until the skin split. The hair, it was the hair. Everyone spoke of it with reverence. They said it had eyes. That it moved in sleep. That it hummed with power. The night before, he heard someone say it even screamed when she was in danger. But how dangerous could hair be, once it was no longer on her head? While they schemed, Ndidi remained silent. Her ears caught whispers, but her spirit stayed rooted in her mother's teachings. She poured herself into healing the land. The village trees had begun to wilt unnaturally. The rains came late, and when they did, they brought sorrow. Ndidi wandered barefoot beneath the sagging boughs, placing her hands on trunks, whispering chants to the soil, mixing leaves with ground snail shell, and laying them at roots. Her braids swayed as though they too were mourning the dying forest. She tried to ignore the bitterness that oozed from Obinna's presence. Even when he spat insults under his breath. Even when he accidentally spilled palm oil on her prayer cloth. She met his scowls with silence, though her braids tensed each time. Then came the red moon. It rose slow and sullen above the hills, casting a crimson hue across the village. The old women muttered, "Tonight, spirits walk." The drummers did not play. The night birds stayed quiet. Even the dogs refused to bark. It was a night of watching and waiting. Ndidi, sensing the heaviness in the air, made her way to the riverbank. She wore her mother's last wrapper, the one with the hand-painted suns. Her braids were freshly oiled, perfumed with ylang-ylang and bitter cola. She knelt on the sand, the cool waters lapping at her toes, and began to chant in the tongue of her ancestors. She spoke of protection, of balance, of the earth's pain and the thirst of the trees. Far behind her, in the quiet shadows of the house, Obinna crept into her room. His heart thundered, but he moved with purpose. In one hand, he held a machete his father used to harvest cassava. In the other, a cloth soaked in palm oil. He stepped over her sleeping mat, breathing in the faint scent of dried hibiscus. The room was dim, but even in the darkness, her braids glowed faintly. They lay on her pillow, coiled and calm, as though asleep themselves. Without hesitation, he raised the blade. One savage swing. The room seemed to shatter with sound. A chorus of shrieks, high and piercing, filled the air, not from Ndidi, but from the braids themselves. Each strand twisted and writhed as it fell, making sounds no hair should ever make, like children crying, like thunder trapped in a bottle, like bones being ground underfoot. Obinna staggered back, clutching the severed braids. He stuffed them into the fire pit outside, laughing in short, mad bursts. The flames swallowed them greedily. The hair curled, hissed, then cracked open like shells. Sparks burst into the air, green and gold, and for a moment the fire turned black. Ndidi was still at the river when the pain hit. She screamed, not from her mouth, but from somewhere deeper. Her hands flew to her scalp, now bare and throbbing with heat. Blood trickled down her neck, but she hardly noticed. The pain wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Something sacred had been stolen. The cord had been broken. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She collapsed onto the riverbank, the chant dying in her throat. And then she heard it. The voice. The same one from her dreams, only louder now, clearer, and laced with a terrible promise. The teeth will return. And they will choose. As the words faded, the river near her feet began to ripple in the wrong direction. Frogs croaked once and fell silent. The air thickened like molasses. Back in the compound, the flames rose higher, too high, casting shadows that danced with open mouths and blinking eyes. The village woke to the sound of screaming. First from Ndidi, then from Obinna. They ran from their huts, clutching lanterns and charms, only to find the fire pit roaring and Obinna on the ground, eyes wide, muttering nonsense. He pointed to the flames, where the last of the braids vanished into smoke. The hare looked at me, he said hoarsely. It grinned. I swear it grinned. But the villagers only stared in silence at Ndidi as she stumbled back from the river, her wrapper soaked in water and blood, her head bare but her presence still commanding. Even in pain, she stood tall. Something ancient had awakened. And the sacred balance was broken. From the moment the fire died and the last braid turned to ash, Ndidi spoke no more. Her voice, once soft and laced with wisdom, disappeared into the silence of that cursed night. She did not weep, did not scream, did not ask why. She simply walked back from the river, barefoot, her wrapper soaked with water and her bare scalp gleaming under the blood-moon sky. Her eyes no longer held the warmth of her mother's teachings. Instead, they darkened, deep, stormy, unfocused. As though she were gazing into something only she could see. When people tried to speak to her, she stared through them. Her mouth remained shut. Her hands no longer stirred healing herbs or traced rain prayers into the soil. Whatever power had lived in her was gone. Or so it seemed. Obinna, drunk with triumph and bravado, strutted through the village like a rooster in mating season. He spoke loudly, recalling in detail how he had vanquished the evil spirit that lived in Ndidi's hair. His mother, Madame Ezeki, played her role well, crying in public, claiming she had feared for their lives. The girl, she said, was never right. My son saved us all. To the naive and frightened, the story made sense. The braids had screamed. They had twisted like serpents. The flames had turned black. Surely that meant witchcraft. Ndidi's father, once a kind man with laughter in his eyes, now stared blankly into space. He did not speak when his daughter passed by. He did not ask why she wore her mother's mourning cloth every day or why she had stopped eating during daylight. It was as if his spirit had been plucked from him, leaving only a hollow man behind. Some said it was grief. Others whispered that the new wife had poisoned his will. Still, there were those who did not believe the lies. They were the quiet ones. The old midwives who had seen her mother perform miracles. The woodcutters who had watched the sacred trees weep sap when Ndidi walked by. The children who missed her lullabies at dusk. These few began to notice strange things. The ground, once green with millet and cassava, now cracked and curled like burnt yam skin. Crops refused to grow. The yam festival came and went with no offerings. The river shrank. The frogs fell silent. The air lost its sweetness. And the children. They began to cough, deep, racking sounds that rattled their tiny ribs. Their eyes lost shine. Their bellies swelled, and no herb could ease their fevers. The village healer tried his best, but even he looked toward the sky and muttered, "Something is wrong. Something has been broken." Elders called emergency gatherings under the Irako tree. They poured libations and prayed to the gods of soil and sky. But still, the land withered. Chickens refused to lay eggs. Goats gave birth to stillborns. And at night, Winds howled through the village like mourning spirits, carrying whispers no one could explain. Whispers that said, "She will return." Ndidi wandered silently during the day, her head always wrapped in thick cloth. No one knew what lay beneath, and no one dared ask. Her bare feet left no prints. Her shadow always bent the wrong way. Some said they saw her stand for hours before the dying trees, her hands twitching, lips moving in silent prayers that the wind carried off. But it was in the nights that the transformation began. It started with an itch, deep, burning, clawing. At first she thought it was the pain of scabbing. But one night, under a dying moon, she stood before a cracked mirror in the back of her mother's old hut and removed the cloth. Her scalp was no longer just skin. Tiny buds had broken through, hard, white, jagged. Not like hair. Not like anything human. They shimmered under the moonlight. She leaned closer. They looked like teeth, small, glistening, some sharp, some flat, growing in chaotic rows like wild crops bursting through cursed earth. She touched one. It twitched. Her hands trembled, but she did not cry. She heard the voice again. The teeth will return. And they will choose. The next morning, she vanished. No one saw her leave. Not even the sentry boys who patrolled the village edges. Her room was empty, save for a small leather pouch containing black stones, stones her mother had used for protection. They searched for her in the surrounding fields. In the healer's hut. By the rivers. But she was gone. The stepmother clutched her wrapper dramatically and cried, "The madness has taken her. Let her die in the wild like the cursed animal she is." Obina smiled but said nothing. Yet something in him shifted that night. His dreams began to rot. He saw hair slithering under doors. Heard teeth clicking in the walls. He woke sweating, always checking his scalp. Meanwhile, in the depths of the ancient forest, Ndidi walked alone. The trees knew her. Their twisted trunks bent subtly as she passed. Moss shifted. Roots pulled back. Birds grew silent. She walked for hours, maybe days, never resting. She followed signs only she could see, spiral patterns in the dirt, the curve of a broken branch, the hum of insects that seemed to guide her. She ate nothing. Drank from dew on leaves. Her head remained wrapped, but the cloth now pulsed with strange life. The sprouts beneath it twitched and clicked in the dark. The forest never asked questions. Finally, she arrived at the Hollow Hills, a place so feared that even hunters refused to set traps near it. The air there was heavy. The rocks bled when cracked. Voices hummed in the leaves, and old tales said spirits lived beneath the earth, guarding secrets too dangerous to know. But Ndidi was not afraid. She stepped into the hollow with bare feet and an uncovered head. And the forest whispered her name. The forest did not welcome all who entered. It was alive, not in the way plants usually live, but in the way old gods sleep with one eye open. The air pulsed with breath. The roots whispered. The bark watched. And yet, when Ndidi stepped between its ancient trees, it parted like a curtain pulled aside for a long-lost child. The deeper she went, the stranger things became. The trees grew twisted and dense, their branches forming arches over narrow trails. Flowers bloomed in colors that hurt the eyes. Frogs sang songs in dead languages. Time unraveled. The sun blinked like a dying lantern, never quite setting but never rising fully again. And in the dusk that clung to every leaf, beings began to appear, watching her from the edges. The first creature she met had bark for skin and eyes like polished amber. Its fingers were vines tipped with thorny claws, and its breath smelled of damp earth and old secrets. It did not speak, but it pressed something into her hand, a knot of roots curled around a black stone heart. She understood without words, "Eat this, and the forest will know you. Trust us, and we will show the path." Others followed. One was a woman-shaped figure with mushrooms growing from her cheeks and wildflowers blooming in her footprints. She wept when she saw Ndidi and said, "Your blood knows our hunger. Your scalp sings of betrayal." Another being, small and hunched, with insects nesting in its beard, offered her a riddle about shadows that scream when touched. Ndidi never asked why. She never questioned. The teeth in her head itched beneath her cloth. They clicked at night like tiny bones clattering in a pouch. Then came the oracle. She lived deep within the hollow hills, inside a cavern whose entrance resembled a yawning mouth. The air within was warm and wet, and each step into the darkness echoed with something that felt too alive to be silence. The oracle sat atop a throne of bones twisted into vines, her skin smooth as stone and her hair coiled like roots. She had no eyes, only empty sockets stitched with thread. But when she opened her mouth, Ndidi saw the truth. Her tongue was covered in teeth, dozens of tiny mouths, each murmuring, giggling, chanting things only the forest understood. She spoke, and the cavern itself shuddered. Your braids were not hair. They were sentinels. The teeth on her tongue giggled again, hissing, sentinels. Sentinels. She is blind but they see. They watched the world through you. They whispered warnings. They held power your mother buried in you when she died. Now, they are hungry. Ndidi stood still. The braids beneath her cloth twitched in agreement. To awaken them again, said the oracle, you must pass 3 trials. If you survive, the forest will give you back your name, and your voice will tear the sky. The first trial was the river of RUTH. Guided by the vine-fingered being, Ndidi approached a sluggish, black river that reeked of decay. Flies buzzed. Bones floated along its surface like forgotten toys. She knelt at its edge, scooped the water in her palms, and drank. It was thick. Bitter. Alive. Her stomach churned. Her eyes burned. Her body collapsed, and she saw her mother, standing on a cliff at midnight, arms raised to a storm. Spirits with glowing eyes circling her, clawing, shrieking. Her mother screaming a name, Ndidi, and pouring a potion of red petals into the ground. A seal. A sacrifice. Her mother had bound something inside her, long ago. When Ndidi awoke, her lips were stained green, and the roots in her scalp had grown longer. The second trial was the field of forgotten names. The mushroom-footed woman led her to a plain littered with graves, each marked not by stone, but by strands of black hair tied around sticks. As she walked, the names whispered. Names of people she had never met. Names of people who had died screaming. With every step, their stories invaded her mind. She saw a boy who choked on poison honey. A girl buried alive for speaking to fire. A man who cut his own eyes out after glimpsing the maw tree. They had all touched something sacred. And suffered for it. Among the whispers, she heard her father's voice. Crying. Apologizing. Pleading with her dead mother. I didn't know she would hurt her. I thought I could protect her. He had been tricked. Enchanted. A puppet in Ezekiel's scheme. Ndidi stumbled out of the field, trembling, her mouth full of dust and her scalp itching like fire. The third trial was the most dangerous. The maw tree. A towering tree with a mouth carved into its trunk, wide and full of jagged bark teeth. Beneath its roots was a hollow space where the forest told her to sleep. Just one night. She curled beneath it, wrapping her cloth tight around her scalp. The roots coiled around her like arms. And she dreamed. Not just dreams, memories. She saw herself as a child, her mother oiling her braids under the moonlight. She saw Obina sneering at her behind her father's back. She saw Ezekiel speaking to a shadow at night, making promises in exchange for silence. She heard her braids again. Whispering. Screaming. Begging her to wake up. Then the dream twisted. She was inside fire. Her scalp burned. She screamed, but instead of words, black threads poured from her mouth, braids. Not hair. Hungry, growling things with white teeth at their tips. They writhed in the flames, snapping at the air. One of them looked at her and said, "Let us speak." She jolted awake. The forest was silent. The sun hovered low. Her hands were wet with blood. She touched her head. The cloth was gone. Her scalp was no longer smooth. The braids had returned, long, thick, and jet black. But they were not the same. They moved. They hissed. At the end of each was a mouth, some with baby teeth, others with sharp fangs. They pulsed with life, wriggling, tasting the air. One of them wrapped gently around her wrist like a familiar pet. She stood, shaky but alive. The oracle appeared again, silent this time. She touched Ndidi's cheek and smiled. "You are reborn." Ndidi opened her mouth. Her voice cracked through the air like thunder. The forest bent. The birds screamed. And the wind carried her words through the trees like prophecy. The teeth remember. And they would never forget. She returned without sound, without announcement, without ceremony. One evening, as twilight draped itself across the village like mourning cloth, she walked in from the edge of the forest. No drums welcomed her. No voices called her name. The air stilled. Chickens stopped pecking. Birds scattered into the sky as if warned by some ancient instinct. She wore a dark, tattered cloak that brushed the earth, and her head remained tightly wrapped in cloth, concealing whatever strange growth now crowned her. The villagers watched from behind shut doors and cracked windows, too afraid to speak but too curious to turn away. Children were pulled back by trembling mothers. Even the dogs whimpered and hid beneath huts. Ndidi's eyes were no longer glassy with grief or dulled by betrayal. They gleamed like wet obsidian, calm, unreadable, but deep enough to swallow a person whole. She went first to the child who had been dying of the fever that no medicine could cure. The boy lay limp in his mother's lap, skin ashen, his tiny chest barely lifting. Ndidi kneeled beside him, lifted the cloth from part of her brow, and placed a single kiss on the child's forehead. A faint sound, like the rustle of leaves, passed through the hut. The child's eyes fluttered open. He gasped. Then sat up. The fever was gone. The mother screamed, not in fear, but in awe. Yet her gratitude was cut short when she looked up and saw that the birds nesting in the rafters had all dropped dead, feathers stiff and eyes wide. The rumor bloomed faster than fire on dry grass. "She has snakes for hair," someone whispered. "No," another hissed. "Worse. The forest made her its bride. She's not the same girl. That thing wears her skin." Obina sat in the family hut, his skin crawling. He had seen her return through the window and felt his bones ache. He could still remember the way her hair had screamed when he sliced it, how the fire had spit and sparked as it devoured the strands. He hadn't thought much of it then. He had laughed. His mother had praised him. They had declared it a cleansing. But now, his dreams betrayed him. Each night, he saw hair slithering through his room, tangling his limbs, coiling around his throat. He woke up gasping, sweat-drenched, with phantom fingers clawing at his chest. On the fourth night, he found teeth marks on his shoulder, deep, round impressions like a child's bite, though no one had touched him. He told no one. But fear bloomed behind his eyes, and his once cocky strut became a hasty shuffle. Outside, the land still rotted. The elders, desperate, called for Ndidi. They met in the broken square of the village, beneath a sky choked with gray clouds. Flies buzzed around shriveled crops. The once holy shrine to the rain god had cracked down the center. Ndidi stood in the middle, wrapped and still, and waited. "You hold power," the oldest elder said, voice trembling. "You walked into the hollow hills and came back. This curse, this drought, this illness, it grows worse by the day. We beg you, lift it." Ndidi's voice, when it came, was quiet but unshakable. Power returns to balance only when the wound is acknowledged. The blood must speak before the land can breathe. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. "What do you mean?" one asked. She turned slightly, gaze fixed on Obina where he stood behind them. He must confess. His hands severed the sentinels. His laughter fed the fire. "I will not raise my hands to heal until the one who broke the circle speaks truth before the ancestors." Obina's face paled. His mother stepped forward, protesting, but a sudden hiss broke the silence. Something slithered beneath Ndidi's cloak. The villagers took a step back. She said nothing else. She turned and walked away as thunder rumbled low in the clouds, though no rain fell. That night, Obina locked his doors. He lit candles. He prayed. But shadows moved where they shouldn't. He dreamed again. The braids crawled across his bed, hissing his name. Abinaya. They wrapped around his ankles and wrists. They pulled. One braid uncoiled and hovered near his face, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of tiny teeth slick with venom. He screamed awake. Panting, he looked around. Empty room. Cold sweat. He stumbled to the basin to splash water on his face, and froze. In the mirror, he saw his reflection. On his shoulder, bright and raw, was a fresh set of teeth marks. Too wide for a human mouth. Too precise to be imagined. The hunt had begun. And this time, the prey was not allowed to hide. Obina tried to run. He gathered what little he could, coins, dried meat, a goat tied by the leg, and fled before dawn, before the sun could show him trembling and weak. But the forest he had once known like the lines on his palm had changed. The paths forked where they never had. Familiar trees now stood too close together, their trunks twisted, their bark groaning softly like old women in pain. Shadows moved even when there was no breeze. He turned and turned, trying new routes, until the ground began to feel spongy beneath his feet and his goat let out a strange cry, then simply vanished, lead rope slack, hoof prints ending mid-step. He was not lost. He was caught. When night fell, the silence was so thick it hurt. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate. Like hair dragging across wood. Like braids full of secrets slithering over dried leaves. A whispering hush, as if the forest itself were murmuring curses in a tongue older than bone. He didn't sleep. Back in the village, his mother was not idle. The widow had always whispered her prayers to darker corners of the spirit realm. Now, she drenched herself in blood and ash, chanting in tongues known only to exiled priestesses. She drew sigils on the walls, planted thorns around the door, and spat into the cooking fire to bind it. She will not take what's mine, she snarled. But the hair came anyway. One evening, the protective charms she had sewn into the door pulsed red and burst into flame. Smoke poured into the hut, curling inwards instead of out. Something hissed. Not a snake. Not a beast. Something deeper. She woke to find a single braid writhing on the mat beside her. It smiled, a toothy, hungry smile, and sank its fangs into her ankle before darting out of reach. Her foot swelled within seconds. Her screams filled the hut, but no one dared to enter. The charms, they whispered, had been bitten through like dry grass. And then came the full moon. That night, as villagers gathered around the central fire for warmth and fear, the drums stopped. The air cooled unnaturally. The fire dimmed, flickered, and a figure stepped into the light. Ndidi. She wore no cloak now. Her hair was unwrapped, a storm of black braids tumbling around her, coiled and alive. Each strand shimmered with unnatural energy, some twitching, others still, and all bearing jagged teeth at their tips, fangs that glinted like wet obsidian. The braids moved like snakes but watched like wolves. She said nothing at first. Just walked to the fire and stared at the flames. The villagers did not speak. Some fell to their knees. Others simply cried. When she spoke, her voice was thunder muffled by sorrow. "My mother was not sick," she said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She was poisoned. Fed whispers and curses until her body broke. She fought it. She whispered her final breath into my braids, tying her soul to mine. I was her last vessel. Her eyes burned. She knew. She saw. But she was too kind. She turned slowly until her gaze fell on the stepmother. The widow laughed, a high, broken sound, more madness than mirth. "Oh child," she croaked. Do you think curses are enough? I did what I had to. She was too strong. Too loved. And her voice faltered as one of the braids uncoiled and slithered toward her like a serpent tasting the air. I took what I deserved. The braid hissed. Then struck. It lashed across her face and tore off her ear. The bloody fragment fell into the dust, twitching. She shrieked, backing away, tripping over her skirts, crawling. Let the devourers eat what was stolen, Ndidi said. The ground trembled beneath them. With a sound like 100 roots breaking through soil, the earth beneath the stepmother cracked. Fingers, gray, gnarled, and too long, shot out, grasping her legs, her arms. She screamed, kicked, thrashed, but the hands pulled her downward, inch by inch. The villagers watched, frozen, as she vanished into the earth like a seed swallowed whole. Her last word was a curse no one understood. Her last breath reeked of rot. Then silence. The fire blazed higher than it ever had before. Ndidi turned away. Her braids retreated, curling back around her crown like a dark halo, swaying slightly, almost satisfied. Obinna, watching from the shadows of the trees, wept. Not for his mother, but because he now understood what was coming for him. And it would not come fast. It would feast slowly. They found Obinna at dawn, curled beneath the whispering trees at the village edge, mud-caked, shivering, eyes wild with terror. His lips were cracked, his feet torn. He hadn't slept in days, only wandered and watched, waiting for something to strike. When the elders came with their staffs and chants, he didn't resist. Not out of shame, but because he was too tired to run anymore. They dragged him to the maw tree. It was older than memory, taller than the shrine tower, its bark dark as night, with gnarled roots that pulsed like veins beneath the soil. No birds perched there. No child dared play nearby. It was the tree that drank guilt. The one that heard truth in blood. Ndidi stood at its base. Her braids moved slowly now, as if listening. They did not sway with the wind but followed their own rhythm, drawn to something deeper, older. Around her, villagers kept their distance. None whispered. None dared look her in the eye. When Obinna saw her, his legs gave out. He fell to his knees. Please, he started. But she raised a hand, and the air thickened. You have two choices, she said, voice neither cruel nor kind. Bury your hands beneath the maw tree. Let it judge you. If your heart holds truth, it will show mercy. She paused, letting her hair twitch behind her like coiled lightning. Or my braids will decide. Obinna hesitated. He looked to the villagers, to the elders, to the skies. No help came. His lips quivered. I didn't mean to. I thought she was cursed. The braids were dangerous. Lie again, Ndidi warned, and the soil will spit you out whole. Still trembling, Obinna crawled to the base of the tree. He stared at the earth, dry and cracked, but humming, alive. He placed his hands into the dirt, fingers disappearing into the roots. The tree pulsed. The roots shifted, curling around his arms, tightening, not gently. The bark groaned, as if speaking in hunger. Then came a sound like a breath being held too long. Obinna cried out. The tree rejected him. The ground bucked. The roots flung his arms back, shredding skin, splattering blood on the trunk. The villagers gasped. Ndidi stepped forward. Her braids uncoiled. 6 of them slithered down her back, licking the air. They struck as one, sinking into his forearms, shoulders, chest, not deep enough to kill. Just enough to hold. He screamed, but they didn't let go. They dragged him toward the earth, toward the space beneath the maw tree where judgment brewed. The ground cracked. And beneath the soil, ashen strands still glowed. The burnt remnants of Ndidi's original braids. Still smoldering. The ash ignited as Obinna was dragged across it. He flailed, trying to stand, trying to crawl, but every movement made the braids tighten. His body twisted unnaturally, elbows bent in wrong angles, hair soaked in sweat. Then his scalp began to pulse. At first, it looked like hair was growing, new, strange tendrils sprouting from his head like mocking parodies of braids. They coiled and shimmered like snakes born from lies. But the fire from the ash rose to meet them. One by one, the false braids sizzled and curled into smoke. He screamed again. And again. And then the ground opened wider, just enough for a body. The roots of the maw tree wrapped around his legs like a mother lifting her child. Obina begged, but his voice cracked into silence. The last anyone saw of him was his eyes, wide, unblinking, as the soil swallowed him whole. The tree pulsed once. Then went still. No one moved. Not even the wind. Then came the first drop of rain. Soft. Cold. Pure. The ground drank it greedily. The air shifted. Somewhere, a sick child coughed and breathed clear. The curse was lifting. The trees, long withered, sighed in relief. Chickens clucked and goats bleated. Rain fell in sheets now, washing the village clean. But Ndidi did not celebrate. She turned from the maw tree, her braids coiling gently around her shoulders once more. Her eyes, once stormy, were clear, but hard. She said nothing as the elders stepped forward to bless her, nor as her father stumbled from the crowd with tears in his eyes. She walked past them. Not to forgive, but to guard. She passed the threshold of the village without turning back, her silhouette swallowed by the rain and mist. The forest, ever watchful, opened for her like an old friend. She had become more than daughter, more than healer, more than victim. She was the sentinel now. And the teeth would always remember. Years slipped away like the flowing river, but the story of Ndidi, the girl whose braids held teeth instead of just hair, refused to fade. In fact, it grew, twisting through whispers and shadows, carried from village to village like a warning etched deep into the bones of the land. They say that when the wind blows just right, you can hear her name carried on the breath of the trees. The woman with living hair, whose braids sway like silent predators, has become a legend. A ghost. A guardian who appears before great betrayals, a sign that the balance between the seen and unseen is tipping. She does not age. Some say she is touched by the spirits of her ancestors, or perhaps she has become one with the very forest itself. The elders no longer speak of her as a girl but as a timeless force, neither cruel nor kind, existing beyond the simple world of men. Her braids, thick with dark strands and teeth that glimmer faintly in the moonlight, move with a life of their own, curling and flicking like serpents ready to strike. Children, with wide eyes and reverent whispers, sing songs about her by the fireside. Cut her hair, and teeth will grow. Lie to her, and the truth will show. Kiss her feet, and the rain will flow. It is a song meant to teach, to warn, and to remind the young that some power lives in what they cannot see. Ndidi has become a tale woven into the very fabric of their childhoods, a lesson about respect, truth, and the cost of betrayal. But Ndidi herself lives far from the eyes of the village now. She dwells at the edge of the world, in a place where the forest grows thick and wild, where the land is raw and untamed. Here, she has built a refuge for orphan girls, those who have lost their way or been cast out by the cruelties of life. She teaches them to listen, not just with their ears but with their spirits. She teaches them to hear the whispers hidden in the strands of their hair, the murmurs carried by the wind, and the silent voices of the earth. Under her watchful gaze, the girls learn old songs and forgotten dances. They learn how to tend the forest and call upon the rains. And most importantly, they learn to respect the power that lies within themselves, even if it looks like nothing more than a simple braid. Sometimes, when the night is thick and the moon hides behind clouds, Ndidi visits the village silently. She walks the same worn paths where she once lived, unseen by most but felt by all. The wind carries her presence, soft as a sigh, sharp as a blade. The villagers catch glimpses of her, reflections in water, shadows that dart just out of reach. They do not dare speak her name aloud when she is near, but their eyes tell stories of fear, respect, and awe. Obina's tree still stands at the village's edge, an ancient sentinel of twisted roots and tangled branches. It pulses faintly beneath the soil, its roots twitching when liars pass beneath its boughs. The villagers know better than to cross that line. Some have tried to bend the truth, only to find the earth beneath their feet grow cold and unyielding. Beneath Ndidi's braids, new mouths open. Small, sharp teeth that gleam like polished bone peek through the dark strands, always watching, always waiting. They hunger, not for blood, but for truth, for justice, for balance. They have become part of her, part of the story she carries forward, a living legacy that will not be broken. The story ends here, or so it seems. But the hair is still growing. Still watching. Still waiting. And the teeth will never forget.